Once upon a time, there was a church. It wasn't a big church. It wasn't even a medium-sized church. Most people called it small. But this church had big ideas. This not-so-big church has a sister church in Nigeria. These brothers and sisters have suffered greatly because of Boko Haram. Many people have died. Some were kidnapped. Buildings were burned. The church in the U.S. sent people and food and money. The church also invited organizations in Washington to meet with leaders from the Nigerian church. By working together, they could make their voice bigger. When these organizations met with politicians, they described their connections with Nigeria. Some said, "We've been working there for 5 years." They went on around the table. And then, the not-so-big church said, "We've been in Nigeria for 95 years. We built the school in Chibok." The church saw that there was devastating violence in the U.S., not just in other countries, and much of it was gun violence. So the church spoke out for peace, and many of its members took to the streets to make a public peace witness.
I just want to share that the song that we're singing, "We Kneel Together," the first verse of that was written by me as a response to the time when the Chibok girls were taken, kidnapped in Nigeria. The song was written as a prayer of response, a prayer of solidarity with the Nigerian church.
We kneel together, we bow as one, we raise our voices to God above. Rain down upon us in this glad hour, streams of mercy, your Spirit's power. We kneel together, we bow as one, we raise our voices to God above. Rain down upon us in this glad hour, streams of mercy, your Spirit's power. We kneel together, we bow as one, we raise our voices to God above. Rain down upon us in this glad hour, streams of mercy, your Spirit's power. Together, we bow as one, we raise our voices to God above. Rain down upon us in this glad hour, streams of mercy, your Spirit's power. We kneel together, we kneel together, we kneel together. We kneel together. We kneel together.
The 2022 Church of the Brethren Annual Conference met live on the banks of the Missouri River in Omaha, Nebraska. It was the first gathering of the Church of the Brethren in person for the big meeting in 3 years due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Hello, this is Brent Carlson. Welcome to Brethren Voices. Over 1,300 people attended the conference, including some who attended virtually. We'll share the spirit of this event with video and music, including an in-studio appearance of John Jones, who, as a delegate, made the trip to Omaha. John Jones, welcome to Brethren Voices.
Thank you.
Was this your first trip to Omaha? What was it like?
It was the first time I had ever been to Nebraska in my life, and I was very pleasantly surprised. Omaha is a really nice city, and it's quite diverse, both racially and ethnically, and it seemed to be a very welcoming city. And as you said, it's on the banks of the Missouri River, and I have some family heritage that goes clear back to my grandfather meeting my grandmother on the banks of the Missouri River in Nebraska. So that was a special note of our time there.
John, last year you attended the conference as a delegate, virtually, and this year you attended in person. Can you tell us about the experience as a virtual attendee versus in person?
It was just more personal, more intimate, even though I was very impressed last year. And the thing that impressed me most about our roundtable conversations, and for that matter, the other nearly 450 delegates, there were 1,300 people at the conference or more, but the delegates who were in the business meetings along with me, I had this feeling that there was this very strong, sincere desire to discern the will of the Spirit among us, and not have it be our agenda, but rather something that came from the Spirit to help us make wise decisions together. That was a very definite feeling that I had. And like other organizations and religious organizations included, you know, the Church of the Brethren has had its own times of tension, differences of opinion on all kinds of things in its history, and it isn't any different today. However, there's this very strong desire that I felt personally at the conference this year of wanting to work together to discern the will of the Spirit. And that's really an amazing thing. It's something to feel good about being part of.
The annual conference of the Church of the Brethren is packed with much activity, including basic gathering of people from all over the country. Numerous international congregations have been attracted to the church, with Nigeria having almost twice as many members as the church congregations in the United States. What did you find compelling about that at this gathering?
For one, the different styles of different ethnic backgrounds and national backgrounds was impressive to me. In terms of Latin American worship, it was much more charismatic, if you like, in a sense. And then one of the ministers from Spain really impressed me, that he was very calm and well-spoken in the sense of knowing what he was talking about, and also just his sincerity. It just came through so strongly, and I think that's kind of European kind of influence. And then of course African worship styles and speaking styles and all, and the music was varied, you know, from African culture and South American, Latin American culture and you know, European culture, and of course our own nation's culture and places like Puerto Rico and what have you that we have here as our own culture. the variety and the personal expression of individual cultures. We were all united in the sense we were all one body, but the individual expression of culture as a form of worship and a form of the body of Christ was really impressive to me. I loved being part of that. That was great.
Well, I would think so. Our representative in South Sudan, Atanasis Ungang, was there, I understand. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us if you got to interact with him and what's going on?
Yeah, Atanasis Ungang and I are friends and have been. We met in South Sudan in 2015. I was there in 1993 as well, but I did not meet Atanasis at that time. And we've been friends ever since meeting in 2015. And he is very involved in an agricultural program right now in Torit, South Sudan, near Juba, about 80 miles east of Juba. And that is going well. And the relationship with the Church of the Brethren between the Inland Africa Church and Church of the Brethren is also going well, and he is part of that.
John, what will you remember from your experiences in Omaha?
Well, one of the things I will remember, I think, above many of the other experiences, was a sermon by a woman who is from one of the churches in Pennsylvania, and she spoke about the story of the woman at the well and Jesus having their conversation.
Jesus spent time in conversation with this woman against all cultural norms and in abject denial of conventional practice. Not only was she a Samaritan, she was a woman. Not only was she a woman, she was a divorced woman. Not only was she a divorced woman, she was a woman alone. Because of these things, Jesus should have run from her as quickly as a jackrabbit fleeing a chasing dog. In that entire culture, men just did not speak to women in public. It was beneath them. Secondly, it would have been doubly outlandish for a Jew to speak to a Samaritan, much less a Jewish male to a Samaritan female. Nevertheless, this conversation on a hot day at lunchtime did occur. It has been said that we often marginalize, but Jesus prioritized, and so it was a priority for him to go to Samaria. And he spent time with this woman against all cultural norms of his day. You might say it was a divine encounter, intentionally orchestrated for a specific purpose. For Jesus, going through Samaria was intentional. It wasn't an afterthought. It wasn't at the bottom of his things to-do list. It didn't happen when he got around to it. He didn't wait for Samaria to come to him. He didn't wait for someone else to do it. He didn't say, John the Baptist can do it. He's more experienced at it than I am. He didn't say, let the pastors or the deacons do it. He didn't say, let some of the people who are not doing anything take care of it. For Jesus, going to Samaria was intentional. Has the memo landed on your lap yet?
And the point that she was making was that we have to intentionally reach out to others who are different from ourselves in whatever ways that might be, and desire to be in relationship with them and be Jesus in the neighborhood to them and receive that same kind of offering from them toward us. And the woman at the well, that's one of my favorite stories, and she just told it so well, and she also made the point that as a denomination, the Church of the Brethren needs to be about seeking out relationship, embracing those who are different from us. And I saw that in terms of, in the past, in the Church of the Brethren and many denominations, there has been a resistance among many people to welcome and affirm and empower LGBTQ friends, brothers and sisters, and the denomination of the Church of the Brethren hasn't been any different in terms of having tensions around that issue. But we are struggling with it, and we are working on it, and it impressed me that somehow there is a feeling right now that even though we're still struggling as a denomination, and there are those that are still having difficulties with that whole issue of welcoming and affirming, there are some big changes going on, and it was to some degree an intuitive sense on my part, but in other ways it was very specific. We have 3 leaders in the Church of the Brethren right now who are moderators. This year's moderator, David Sollenberger, who was elected last year, and he's an incredible guy who's very open and affirming. A second person named Tim McElwee, who is the new moderator-elect for this year, and he will oversee the conference next year. And then another person who was elected this year as moderator-elect. Her name is Madeline Metzger. She's a younger woman, about 44, mixed race and mixed ethnicity, and all 3 of these people are from open and affirming congregations. And that to me is a really strong indication that we have trustworthy leadership and leadership that is not afraid to embrace diversity and welcomes diversity. So that
love is the reason for our existence. We are called to live in love. Because we are made in the image of God, and because God is love, loving others is not just our calling, it is our very identity. It is who we are. And since loving is our identity, we must frequently and consistently ask ourselves, how do we express God's love? How do we live out the love of God? Do our actions look like love? Since God loves everyone fully and unconditionally, as children of God, made in the image of God, we love our African American sisters and brothers whose humanity is routinely denied and whose lives are under constant threat. We love our Muslim, our Latinx, our Haitian, our Asian brothers and sisters whom society often pushes to the margin and treats as objects of scorn and discrimination. And we love our gay and lesbian sisters and brothers and other members of the LGBT community whom we have far too frequently cruelly rejected, and whose God-given identities and participation in the life of the church has been consistently denied.
I mentioned Belita Mitchell earlier, the woman who preached on the meeting of Jesus and the woman at the well. Well, Sollenberger also talked about Zacchaeus, who climbed the tree, the tax collector guy, and how Jesus deliberately reached out to embrace him. And this idea of embracing one another as Christ embraces us really came through in Sollenberger's leadership. And as I said before, the whole kind of tone of the conference, it felt good.
The Southern Ohio and Kentucky District brought a query to the annual conference to consider and deal with diversity in the church and stand with people of color. John, tell us what happened with the query.
Well, first of all, the question was, how can the church support people of color and people who are suffering the consequences of systemic racism, people at the border, the stranger who isn't being welcomed? How can we as a church stand with people of color and work against systemic violence, systemic violence and systemic racism, racial type violence, so that all can be truly free and equal. And the neat thing, other than the fact that the conference affirmed that query, that is something we should be doing as a church, the really neat thing is that On Earth Peace, which is one of the agencies of the Church of the Brethren, is asked to work in the coming year with the Southern Ohio, Kentucky district and the Greater Church of the Brethren to talk about how they will implement, what they will do, and how they will implement those efforts to stand with people of color. And it was wonderful to just, when the final vote came, whether we go ahead with this or not, I didn't see one hand that was in opposition. I mean, it was a unanimous declaration of the fact that people in the church wanted to stand for justice.
I understand staying in relationship and lifting the conversation and each other were very important topics. Can you comment about that?
Yes. You mentioned David Sollenberger a moment ago. When he was a young man on his father's farm, a neighbor decided to dump a whole bunch of rocks on his father's land. And David was pretty upset about that and wanted to.
It sounds to me like the Apostle Paul believes that relationships that we have with our brothers and sisters may be more important than proving ourselves right. That was my father's message to me when I was growing up on the farm in Pennsylvania. His neighbor, a fellow farmer, gathered up all the rocks in his field and decided, for whatever reason, to dispose of them on our cornfield. And not a small pile, but a large pile of rocks. And not just small rocks, large rocks, the kind you find in limestone soil. Now, it was clear where they had come from. What was unclear was why he decided to put them on his neighbor's field. What was also clear was that my father's second oldest son was outraged. Pick them up with a skid loader, I said. Dump them back on his land, his outraged son argued. But my father softly replied, no, I'll take them and put them on my own rock pile at a different part of the farm so that I can plant corn in the field where the rocks were dumped. That son, who believed that a horrible injustice had taken place, had just been taught a lesson that relationships with neighbors were more important than being right about who should have done what with those rocks. I hate lessons like that, but I need lessons like that. God's relationship with God's children is important. Yes, it involves discipline, but it also involves loving acceptance of who we are and our potential for growing in discipleship and understanding.
And that, I think, is at the heart of what we're called to be as brothers and sisters in Christ, that we're going to have differences. I mean, the history of the church, going clear back to the time of Jesus, I mean, you know, there's been conflict, and sometimes very severe conflict. At one time, there were brethren who owned slaves, and Brethren Conference, late 1700s, the 1780s, said not only should brethren not own slaves, but they shouldn't just sell them to somebody else. They need to be free. And so there's always been conflict, right? But it's important to be in relationship with one another, and as we choose to do so, we communicate in a different way. We lift the conversation. We don't sweep it under the carpet. We lift it, and in doing so, we lift one another. That's the hope. That's the ideal. And of course, we're all human, and we don't always do the best job of that. There's plenty of times in Brethren history where there hasn't been such courageous, forthright statements made. I might just add to that, Brent. I have a neighbor. We live right next to each other. We love each other, right? But he and I are like on different fields in terms of political kind of orientation. He looks at the events of the United States of these recent years quite differently than I do. And he expresses a very different kind of political opinion. But every day, I need to remind myself that I love this guy, and I'm going to stay in relationship with him, regardless how irritating it might be at times. But it takes some work.
It does, because it's so easy to say, I'm done with that. I'm not going to talk to them anymore.
But I think he's decided that about me too. So that's good. I think he's decided I'm going to put up with this old jerk.
So you're both making the effort
I think
to work
we are.
together.
Yeah, I think we are.
Good. Wonderful. I think that's what we all need to do.
Sure.
And remind ourselves to do it.
Yeah, it's not easy.
John Jones, we thank you so much for being with us on Brethren Voices.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you very much.
For Brethren Voices, this is Brent Carlson.
And John Jones, wishing you peace.
1% at a time in a world so much needing peace.